In Eastern tradition, the fox is that being. Not an ordinary animal, but a creature that learned to exist on both sides at once. In Chinese and Japanese folklore, she accumulates wisdom over time, crossing the veil between the visible and the invisible. She is ancient, and antiquity, for those who know how to read it, is synonymous with depth. Today she has a mirror in her hand, but she is not looking at herself. She is looking at what stayed behind. Pause, and perhaps you know that posture. Perhaps you yourself have been that way, present in body, but with your attention entirely turned toward something that already passed, or toward something that hasn't arrived yet. As if the now were only a place to pass through between two places that feel more real. Today the question we brought is this. You spend most of your time inside your own mind. What are you doing with that place? Let's enter that question slowly. Have you ever arrived somewhere and not known how you got there? Not literally, the body made the journey, the hands held the wheel, or the feet walked the familiar path. But the mind was somewhere else entirely, working through a conversation that hasn't happened yet, replaying one that already happened and won't leave your head, building scenarios, rehearsing answers, anticipating problems, judging past decisions. And you arrived. The body arrived. But you, somehow, were still in the middle of the way. It is such a common experience that it barely feels like an experience. It just feels like the way things are. The mind thinks, comes and goes. It worries, plans, remembers, imagines. That is normal. But there is a difference between a mind that thinks and a mind you live inside. And most of us live inside our own heads far more than we realize. Think about how much of your day happens in there. Before sleep, when thoughts appear without invitation. In the morning, before the day has even begun, when the list is already running. In the middle of a meal, a conversation, a moment that could have been rest. But the mind won't switch off, won't loosen, won't stop. You live there. The question is, what kind of place is this place where you live? There is something most of us rarely do, and that may be one of the most important things we could do. Look at our own mind with the same attention we would give to any environment where we spend a great deal of time. If you spent the majority of your day in a specific room, an office, a living room, a bedroom, you would naturally pay attention to how that space is arranged. Whether the light is good, whether the air circulates, whether things have accumulated that make the space feel smaller than it is. You would make adjustments, not because the space needs to be perfect, but because you are going to spend a lot of time there, and it makes sense for it to be a place where you can breathe. The mind is the space where you spend more time than any other, and most of us have never stopped to ask how it is doing. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself in notes never meant to be read, that the quality of our life depends less on external circumstances than on the quality of the thoughts we inhabit. Not because the external world doesn't matter, but because the internal world is the filter through which everything else is experienced. He was not saying the mind can ignore reality. He was saying that the mind at war with itself turns any reality into additional suffering. And the mind that has learned to be a more inhabitable place finds space to move through even the most difficult circumstances without losing itself completely. In modern psychology, the therapist and writer Tara Brach describes something she calls the trance of unworthiness. The idea that most people live in a constant background state of self-criticism, internal judgment, a voice that evaluates, compares, and almost always finds something lacking. Not as an occasional event, as the default weather of the mind. And what she observed over decades of clinical and contemplative practice is that this weather is not the truth about you. It is a habit, a pattern that formed over time, reinforced by experiences, by absorbed messages, by a culture that rarely teaches how to inhabit your own mind with gentleness. It is not your fault, but perhaps it is your responsibility, in the gentlest and most powerful sense of that word. In Zen Buddhism, there is a practice called zazen, seated meditation, whose goal is not to empty the mind or stop thoughts. The aim, if there is one, is to learn to observe what passes through the mind without being carried away by every current, to see the thought arise, to see it pass, without identifying completely with each one as if it were a definitive truth about who you are. The mind does not need to become quiet to be inhabitable. It needs an observer who does not panic at what they see. And when Marcus Aurelius, Tara Brach, and Zen meet at this point, when philosophy, psychology, and contemplation point in the same direction, something begins to shift in the question we ask about our own mind. What if the wrong question was this one? How do I get my mind in order? Because that question, as reasonable as it sounds, already carries inside it an assumption worth examining. The assumption that the mind needs to be in order to be a place worth being. That as long as there are difficult thoughts, unresolved worries, memories that hurt, uncertainties that won't close, the place isn't ready yet, isn't inhabitable yet, as if you were going to wait for the renovation to finish before starting to live in the house. But the renovation never finishes. There will always be a thought that shouldn't be there, a worry that arrives without warning, a memory that comes at the wrong time, a version of the future that frightens more than it should. That is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you are human, and that the human mind is exactly like this, alive, noisy, full of currents pulling in different directions at the same time. The question is not when the mind is going to get in order. The question is what you do while you live in it. What if the wrong question was this one? How do I get my mind in order? Because that question, as reasonable as it sounds, already carries inside it an assumption worth examining. The assumption that the mind needs to be in order to be a place worth being. That as long as there are difficult thoughts, unresolved worries, memories that hurt, uncertainties that won't close, the place isn't ready yet, isn't inhabitable yet, as if you were going to wait for the renovation to finish before starting to live in the house. There is a deep difference, often invisible from the outside, but enormous on the inside, between the person who is inside their own mind trying to control every thought, resisting every difficult emotion, in constant war with what appears, and the person who is inside their own mind like someone who has learned to be a good host for what arrives, not agreeing with everything, not letting everything in without distinction, but without collapsing every time something difficult shows up at the door. And then the question changes shape. It is no longer, when am I going to get my mind in order? It becomes, what can I do today to make my mind a slightly gentler place to inhabit? Not despite what is in there, but by working with what is in there. That question does not have an answer you find once and keep forever. It is a practice, an orientation, a choice that renews itself, sometimes every hour, sometimes every day, not to let life pass while you wait for your head to be ready to live it. Every contemplative tradition that survived time arrived, in different ways, at a perception that is simple to state and difficult to live. That the quality of your inner experience does not depend on what is in there. It depends on how you relate to what is in there. The Stoics made a distinction that sounds technical but is deeply practical. The distinction between what they called the hegemonican, the ruling part of the soul, and the thoughts and impressions that pass through it. The impression arrives. The judgment about the impression, that is yours. And it is in that space between the impression and the judgment that freedom exists. Not the freedom to not feel, the freedom to not be completely governed by what you feel. The poet and mystic Rumi wrote about the human mind with an image that crossed centuries without losing its force. He spoke about the heart as a house, and about how we ourselves decide what we allow to live there. Not that we can control every visitor who knocks at the door, but that we can decide which ones we invite to sit, which ones we serve tea, and which ones we simply watch pass without opening the door completely. It is not control. It is curation. There is something that reason can understand about this, but that it cannot make happen on its own. Because the mind at war with itself does not find peace through intellectual decision. You can understand completely that your thoughts are not facts. You can know, rationally and with solid grounding, that excessive self-criticism doesn't help, that rumination doesn't solve, that worry about the future rarely produces the preparation it promises. And still, and those who have been through this recognize the moment with a mixture of exhaustion and humor, you can know all of that and still be doing exactly the opposite at 3 in the morning. Because what changes the relationship with the mind is not more knowledge about the mind. It is presence inside it. It is the quiet and repeated practice of noticing what is happening in there without immediately trying to fix it, suppress it, or identify with it completely. It is the capacity, which develops slowly, with stumbles, with setbacks, to be with your own thoughts without being entirely governed by them. And perhaps it is exactly here that the fox's alchemy meets the human mind. Because alchemy was never about creating something from nothing. It was always about transforming the relationship with what already exists. The heat does not invent the gold. It reveals what was always in the matter, hidden beneath what was not essential. Perhaps the mind works the same way. It is not that you need to become a different person in there. It is that you need to learn to see what is already there with slightly different eyes, with a little more gentleness, with a little less urgency for everything to be resolved before you allow yourself to be well. It is not a belief you adopt. It is something you perceive in that specific moment when you are in the middle of a difficult thought and, for some reason you cannot yet fully name, you manage to take one small step back and observe. Not solve, not suppress, just observe. And notice that you are the one observing, and not only what is being observed. That millimeter of distance, that minimal space between you and the thought, that is where freedom begins. Your mind is not going to get in order before you start living in it differently. That sentence deserves a moment, because many of us are waiting for the anxiety to pass before being happy, waiting for the uncertainty to resolve before committing to something, waiting for the difficult thoughts to stop appearing before feeling that it is all right to be here, inside this life, inside this mind. And while we wait, life passes. Not in the big moments, those we tend to notice, but in the small ones, in the ordinary afternoons, in the conversations that could have been more present, in the moments of rest that the mind turned into more work because it couldn't stop. Taking care of your mind is not a project you complete. It is an orientation you choose every day in small and sometimes imperceptible doses. It is the choice to notice when you are being cruel to yourself and ask whether that is helping. It is the choice to interrupt rumination not with force, but with curiosity. What is this thought trying to tell me that I haven't yet heard? It is the choice to, at some point in the day, truly be where you are, without agenda, without solving, just present. And it does not need to be perfect. It does not need to happen all day. One real moment of presence, one moment in which you are here, in this room, in this body, in this breath, is already different from zero. It is already you making the choice to inhabit your own mind rather than simply survive it. The fox did not finish the work at the workbench. She just turned the mirror in the right direction and stayed looking, not at what was left behind, not at what is yet to come, but at what is here, now, with everything that includes. The question that remains, to carry through the coming days, especially in the moments when the mind gets noisier, is this: if your mind were a physical place where you live, what would you change in it? Not to make it perfect, but to make it a place where you could breathe. If something here is still moving inside you, if some room was touched, if something that was closed found a little more light, perhaps it is worth continuing to walk this path. And if you would like, write in the comments how your mind is today. It doesn't need to be elaborate. Can be a word, can be an image. Sometimes naming the state you are in is already the first gesture of care toward the place where you live. I am certain that what you write will reach someone who is in the same room as you, and who needs to know they are not there alone. The mind does not need to be in order to be a place worth being. It just needs someone who won't give up on inhabiting it.